Hello and welcome to NewsClick. I am Prabir Purkayastha and we are looking at mapping fault lines. Today we are going to start with the latest scenario in Ukraine, the war between Russia and Ukraine and the possibilities, if not of peace, at least a temporary suspension of the war. The base background to this is that Russia seems to have succeeded in its one aim, which was to weaken the Ukrainian army and see that a large section of the Ukrainian army gets bogged down or destroyed in the specific operations Russia is doing. One of the important areas right now is what is called the Pokrovsk Junction. It is where it's a transport hub in Ukraine, and that, it seems, has been really brought under the control of the Russian forces. It's not that they have taken over all the points that Ukraine held within it, but what they consider as a pocket or as encirclement seems to have happened. If that happens, then at some point or the other, either Ukraine will have to break through to help its soldiers remain there, or will have to surrender. And at the moment, it's not easy to see what's happening, but it does appear by all reports that we see, including what map you have seen here. This is what is called, it is the Institute for Study of War. It's essentially a UK-based think tank, which is very close to the NATO's position. Based on the military situation, there has been discussions between the United States and Russia. In that, basically between Putin's representative and President Trump's representative, the two presidents' representatives have met and prepared what's called a 28-point plan. In the 28-point plan, it's not, as the media is claiming, that it is just one-sided and a surrender and so on. It has one specific condition, that Ukraine will not be a part of NATO, but can be a part of the European Union, which is a major concession by Russia. It's not very different from the plan that was originally rejected by Ukraine with the support of the US and the UK. In fact, it is said it was the instigation of the former Prime Minister of UK, which led to the plan being sabotaged, so to say. Otherwise, the two sides are very close to an agreement. If you take that, then the question, if it is asked, what has Ukraine gained by fighting for so long, could be argued that at the time, the army that Russia had asked Ukraine to limit itself to was, I think, 100,000. Now it's 600,000. It will make Ukraine's army still the largest in Europe, minus, of course, Russia. Probably also Turkey, but we have to check on that. Then there are the 4 oblast provinces, if you will, that were again negotiated. And this time, unlike the last time, what Russia has agreed, that the 2 oblasts, it will be status quo. Ukraine will withdraw in Donetsk and Luhansk, the 2 oblasts provinces, they said, are Russian-speaking and the cause of the civil war that took place over there. And while in Donetsk, Ukrainian forces would withdraw, the vacated area would be considered as Russian territory, but will not have Russian military. So some concessions beyond what the 22nd discussions 3 years back that were taking place. So this 3 years of war has gained Ukraine some other benefits, we can argue, over what was being proposed at the time in Ankara, which is where the two sides had met. But nevertheless, it's still, let's face it, a victory for what Russia had argued for, that Russian-speaking provinces should stay with Russia, join with Russia, because the Russian-speaking population did not want to be in Ukraine anymore, particularly as their language, their newspapers, their news channels, their radio and television were all being denied the right to propagate or speak or write in their language. So given that, this appears to be a reasonable settlement, at least from our point of view meaning the general people at large in the world who are not a party to this war. Interesting point is what the European Union is doing. While the European Union does not have the ability to support the war without the United States, but they can play the part of a spoiler, spoil the game, spoil the peace plan. And Kaja Kallas, who's would be considered the equivalent of the foreign minister of the European Union, if it had a position like that, is very clear. EU has 2-point plan. First point is to weaken Russia. Only the second part is to support Ukraine. So not support Ukraine and oppose Russia, but weaken Russia. Please mark the words. Weaken Russia and support Ukraine. So it appears that their purpose is to use Ukraine to weaken Russia. But their interest really is not Ukraine. Their interest seems to be weakening Russia. Now, sanctions at the moment are hitting Russia still, the oil sanctions. This is Kaja's press conference that she talked about. And the export of Russian oil is at its crudest, is at its lowest. It's also in the peace plan that they have drafted. It's also there that 100 billion of US dollar equivalent money that they had seized. It was seized by the EU, and it's a Belgian bank in which this money is there. The total is 240 billion. Out of that, 100 billion will be used to support Ukraine reconstruction. If we look at the peace plan, this 19-point peace plan still, it appears to us from outside, still gives Ukraine at least a breathing space, allows it to stop this war, allows it to also not lose more people in this war, which has been raging now for quite some years, and possibility of reconstruction of Ukraine. Yes, some provinces will be lost or partially lost, but the rest of the, at least non-Russian speakers in Ukraine, they will be, or what's being called the Ukrainian language speakers, they at least would have a chance of rebuilding a nation. And the important part of it, they can become a new part of European Union, but not a part of NATO, because that is the hard dividing line which the two sides have, that if you want to be a part of NATO, the war will continue. Ukraine's population has dwindled quite a bit. They have lost a lot of young people who have left Ukraine. So if it bleeds more, both in terms of fighting the war, losses on the battlefield, of course, so is Russia, but Ukraine has a smaller population, so losing in the battlefield is, of course, going to be a bigger blow to Ukraine as of now, considering a lot of the youth have also left Ukraine and gone to surrounding countries. So given this, to the rest of us in the world, this appears a fair peace plan. But as I said, the spoiler at the moment is European Union, who has argued that only peace plan acceptable to it is essentially a Russian surrender, withdraw completely from even the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine, and accept the burden of reparations, what you could try and dictate to a defeated enemy, while at the moment, the European Union does not have the military strength to fight Russia and needs essentially President Trump and the United States to support its war against Russia. And as Kaya says, the goal being that we want to weaken Russia. So that's where I think the Ukraine war as the moment stands. I think between Trump and the president of Russia, Putin, there is an understanding this war should stop. This war should stop with some give and take. The United States does not want this drain of its arms to continue the way it is doing at the moment. They don't have the military infrastructure today to support a war at this scale. The European Union is building its military infrastructure. It's still weak. So given this, from an outsider's point of view, and let's face it, we are all outsiders, those who are not in Ukraine and not in Russia. Outsider's point of view, this seems to be quite a favorable end to the war from Ukraine's point of view. It preserves the core Ukrainian state. It preserves their ability to integrate in the European Union, the common market of European Union, even if it is not a part of a military alliance. And it will still, with 600,000 soldiers, which this agreement is proposing, which the Russians have also agreed to, it will still be the largest army in European Union. So given all of this, it appears that this should be an agreement which should be welcomed with open arms. But, as we have said, there are spoilers in the game. And at the moment, the spoilers are really European Union. And some of the leaders of the European Union, we have von der Leyen, who is the chief equivalent of the president, if you will, of the European Union, and you have the equivalent of the foreign minister, Kallas, who is also talking about how this whole agreement should be much more against Russia than what has been agreed to between the two sides, Putin and Trump's envoys, who had reached a 28-point agreement. Now, whether the 19-point agreement will be acceptable to the Russians, is there a negotiation which is still ahead? What will the European do? And what will Mr. Zelensky do, who has been weakened, as you know, due to a rather bad political corruption case, which has hit some of his close aides. And it seems a very large amount of money has been taken out of Ukraine, essentially by people who have siphoned off what should have gone to the war, instead of which it has gone to their pockets. Classic case of what corruption does. Is Zelensky involved in this corruption? That is something only future investigations could say. But nevertheless, these were people quite close to him. Therefore, he has also been weakened in Ukraine. Let's move to the other issue, which is also right now in the news. The US at targeting of Venezuela, President Trump identifying a certain organization, we'll see what that organization is one of the biggest terrorist attackers apparently against United States, and leading what it considers as the smuggling of drugs into United States. They also have a name for it. Now, this is the mobilization that is taking place. As you can see, this is Venezuela. Of course, there is Colombia here. There are other countries in the Americas. This is what would be called Latin America or South America, if you take this part out. This is one of the largest concentration of military that has been done in the Americas. Now, there are now large warships over there. There is a number of other vessels which are also there. There is Air Force over there. Bomber forces are over there. So all of this, if you take into account, it appears that the United States might actually invade Venezuela. One possibility. At the moment, it seems to be putting pressure on Venezuela. hoping there will be an internal upsurge against President Maduro. I'll come to this so-called cartel which they have been talking about. But in this process, a number of most probably fishing vessels have been sunk with just warning, no attempt to board them, have been sunk and people killed. The number of these boats are, I think, more than 20 at the moment, and number of people killed are also quite large. Each of the boats may have 15-20 people in the boat. Mostly fisher folk, from what we can figure out from what the reports are, or people who might be taking some goods from one island to the other, from Venezuelan coast to, say, Haiti, Puerto Rico, and so on. But this whole attempt is really to pressurize Venezuela. I have marked Colombia over here because if you take what is the cocaine smuggling that takes place, large production of cocaine takes place essentially in Colombia, and there are big drug cartels who operate from there. Now, only about 5% of the drugs go via Venezuela. Almost entirely, or 95% and above, go through this side, the western part of the continent, North American continent. So this whole myth that huge amounts of drugs are going from Venezuela is not borne out by facts. This is what a journalist who's written in The Guardian has said. The US war on terror has killed millions. Trump is now bringing it to Venezuela. Now, why is he bringing it to Venezuela? There are a number of UN reports, and you can check the UN reports which are there on basically drug menace that is there. Number of drugs are there, not only the old-fashioned drugs which used to be products of the field. You had poppies as opium, you had basically cocaine, coca from origins. You also had a number of other drugs, cannabis, hemp. All of this produced was to be technically considered as opiates. But what's now happening is a huge amount of what would be called chemical or synthetic opiates, which are now flooding the market. Fentanyl crisis in the United States being one of them. And obviously, the whole way smuggling and production of opiates is taking place is changing. UN has reported all of this. There are even reports, committees, or part of the execution of what UN thinks is its responsibility. And what it has said is very clear, that Venezuela doesn't even figure in the top exporters of opiates. And the major opiate production as well as smuggling really takes place from other Latin American countries. As we said, the key one or one of the major ones being Colombia. So why is this focus on Venezuela? The key issue is Venezuela has been the major focal point of resistance in Latin America. If you remember, Hugo Chavez was one of those who opposed the United States in the region and on international stage. He was identified as a person who must be removed. Coups were attempted in Venezuela. They didn't succeed. After Hugo Chavez died, then Maduro is the president now. Attack has continued. And yes, there are question marks with respect to the Venezuelan elections. But the prop that the United States wanted to put in place of Maduro, that misfired badly. And it's very clear that Maduro commands a major part of the Venezuelan population, if not in his favor, but definitely against any American intervention. And that's what is really making the United States feel very upset, because President Trump believes that, okay, he can no longer run wars in West Asia. He's offloaded it to Israel. He cannot run wars in other parts of Europe and Asia. But he still thinks that Latin America is America's fiefdom. It belongs to the United States and they should be in total control of the Americas. It's really a resurrection, if you will, of the Monroe Doctrine, which says no outside power should intervene in the Americas, both South and North America. And United States is the sole guardian of the two continents and should have the right to do what it wants. As we know, it meant the United Fruit Company pulling strings and even staging coups in Latin American countries. We had opium, of course, but also various crime gangs. But most of all, it was the military dictatorships that aligned with the United States, were trained by the CIA and saw to it that any movement which was radical enough to challenge capitalist forces, or in Latin America, also what would be called latifundia, those who have a lot of land. They don't cultivate all of it. A lot of it is left fallow, but they don't want to give up rights over the land. And therefore, governments which have tried to take that land through land reforms have faced a hostile environment, and with American help, military coups which have taken place in a lot of these countries. Brazil, Venezuela, Colombia, all of them have faced military coups, military government, and governments propped up by the military with direct relationship with the United States, as it used to be called. That a lot of the military was taken to the United States to be trained in how they could build coups. In fact, one of the examples of that, which is rather public, is Chile, where Chilean coup took place. And as we know, that led to a long 20-25 years of military dictatorship over there when President Allende's government was overthrown. So this has been the scenario till the last 15-20 years, when various democratic left progressive forces have come out in Americas, and essentially the military, pro-American military-run dictatorships have weakened. They know now they need the sanction of the people. So this now, what we see as trying to encircle Venezuela, remove it from international trade, make any support to be more difficult, try and isolate it with now a military naval blockade perhaps. All these are on the cards as of now. And this is what Venezuela has to now survive. Can it survive such a military blockade? And if it does, what are the impact on its economy? And I think that's the basic challenge for Venezuela. Is United States likely to militarily attack Venezuela? Probably not. Though the kind of communication that's being talked, is being handed out, the declarations being made, the war tempo is certainly being increased, so we cannot discount it as yet. Well, Trump is an uncertain character. We don't know which way he will go, and it's quite possible he may not go the same way depending on his mood of the day. So we don't know whether he will finally settle some compromise, or will he continue like this, or will actually attack Venezuela militarily, if not by occupation, but trying to take out Maduro in some action. So those are things we have to yet watch. So as a fault line, I think this is very important. And as we have headline shows, there are also bases they have now reactivated. They always had bases. They have reactivated some of these bases. They are in blue dots over here. And we have to see what is likely to happen. As you know, Panama had earlier an invasion in which Noriega, the president, though he was a dictator of Panama, was taken out, even though he was a US ally. So we don't know which way the US will go and whether it's possible that they would take military action in Venezuela, even if it is not an invasion of Venezuela. These are things which we still have to watch. We have to wait and watch what develops, but we have flagged it as one of the major flashpoints which are building up today in the world. We do not regard Taiwan in the same way or the tension between China and Japan in the same way. I think they're relatively more stable because both Japan and China are relatively more stable as leadership or as countries. Though we have a new leader in Japan, Prime Minister, and she has been quite aggressive in her speeches. But Japan, I think, has enough checks and balances not to enter into a war with China. But as far as Venezuela and the United States is concerned, that's not the equation. And therefore, the chances of a military flare-up in Latin America centered on Venezuela is a real cause of concern. What other Latin American countries will do, what is the support they give, what is the position they take. A lot of them have openly opposed any attack on Venezuela. That we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and watch what develops here. Well, I think we have covered two very important arenas of struggle, military tensions, sources of global instability as of now. First is the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, which has the West, meaning the United States and the European Union, NATO on one side, and Russia on the other. Second is what's building up in Latin America, a continuation of the Monroe Doctrine. The United States wants complete, not sovereignty, but complete control over the Americas. And I think we'll have to see how both of these shape up. Latin America, Canada, Mexico and Canada have already faced trade wars. Now Venezuela is under the scanner, under the gun, if you will, of the United States. We'll have to see how the continent shapes up, how Latin America shapes up, and what the response the Venezuelan people will make. And let's not forget, the United States people and how they react is also going to constrain the American president or support him. That's also something we'll have to wait and watch. With this, we come to the end of our show. Mapping Faultlines will be with you when the situation demands, because we're not doing it right now as a weekly show.